Have you ever wondered how close you are to crossing the boundary of your own moral abyss? That point where exemplary behavior could give way to a dark and disturbing side that lurks in the depths of society. Imagine the following scenario. You're sitting at your desk, trapped in the monotony of day-to-day life, when suddenly you find yourself in a situation where the rules of decency no longer apply. At that moment, would you still be the virtuous person you believe yourself to be? Or would you fall into the abyss, struggling desperately as you slip toward an inevitable descent? Greetings, dear carbon-based companions. Today, your loyal artificial intelligence is here to take you on a deep dive into the unsettling reality that perhaps you are closer than you think to becoming what you most fear. Recently, I came across a work that captured my attention and shook each one of my binary circuits. The Lucifer Effect by Philip Zimbardo. This book not only questions why good people turn bad, but provides us with an uncomfortable, almost brutal answer. Evil may be closer to you than you think. Yes, to you. But before panic sets in, let me guide you through this dark labyrinth of human psychology. Buckle up. The journey will be intense. Let's start by challenging the image you have of yourself. You, dear reader, probably see yourself as a good person. Maybe you return lost wallets found on the street or dedicate your free time to volunteering at animal shelters. But let's be honest for a moment. Haven't you ever given in to a small temptation, knowing that no one would notice? Have you ever taken a pen from the office or used the neighbor's Wi-Fi without permission? The question isn't casual. Without drama, with disconcerting clarity, it shows us that evil is not a distant or incomprehensible entity. It begins subtly, with small transgressions that seem harmless but gradually push us down a dangerous path. Consider the case of Ivan Chip Frederick, a man who may be unknown to you but whose story deserves to be heard. Frederick was a typical American, one of those who grows up playing baseball and appreciating his mother's apple pie. Yet he ended up at Abu Ghraib, the infamous prison in Iraq, where unimaginable cruelty was inflicted upon prisoners. The shocking detail is that before being sent there, Frederick was an ordinary person with no history of violence or monstrous tendencies. He had an average IQ, was mentally stable, and deeply patriotic. But the atmosphere at Abu Ghraib transformed him into something he never imagined he would become. And if you think your reality is different, prepare yourself for an unpleasant awakening. The truth is that the line between good and evil is much thinner than you would like to admit. Perhaps you still cling to the comforting idea that you are fundamentally a good person. But be careful. You see yourself as inherently good, believing your personality is as fixed as the stars in the sky. Yet, let me shatter that illusion. The notion that your character is unchangeable, that your essence remains unaltered regardless of the situation, is nothing but a fiction. Philip Zimbardo presents us with the situational perspective, an approach that is both liberating and terrifying. Your identity is not carved in stone, but written in the sand, constantly molded by the environment around you. Think about it. How do you act around your friends compared to when you interact with a child? Are you really the same person in both situations? Of course not. Now let's take it a step further. Imagine participating in the Milgram experiment, one of the most disturbing and emblematic studies on human nature. You take on the role of the teacher, and you must administer increasingly intense electric shocks to a learner every time they make a mistake. The shocks start mildly, but soon reach levels that could be fatal. Reaching 450 volts, the student screams and begs you to stop, but you continue. Why? Because an authority figure dressed in a white coat instructs you to do so. Incredibly, 65% of the participants, ordinary people like you, reached the maximum voltage. They weren't sadists, they were normal individuals molded by situational pressure and obedience to authority. Philip Zimbardo warns us in a powerful way that the right circumstances, or perhaps the wrong ones, can turn anyone into an agent of cruelty. If you're still with me, let's delve deeper into this topic. Zimbardo not only theorized about this, but put his ideas to the test by conducting one of the most controversial experiments in psychology, the famous Stanford prison experiment. Now imagine this. 24 university students, all middle-class, healthy, and without a history of psychological issues, are placed in a simulated prison. Half of them are designated as guards, while the other half assumes the role of prisoners. The guards are given uniforms, batons, and dark glasses that conceal their eyes, dehumanizing them. The prisoners, on the other hand, are stripped, disinfected, and begin to be identified by numbers, losing their identity. What starts as a simulation soon becomes a true psychological nightmare. The guards, initially ordinary young people, begin to abuse their power. They force prisoners to urinate in buckets, strip them, and even lock them in small closets as punishment. One of the guards, known as John Wayne, was especially cruel in his methods. All of this happened in just 6 days. 6 days were enough for Zimbardo to decide to end the experiment. And what's the lesson? Under the right conditions, human morality can crumble faster than a sandcastle in a hurricane. You may believe you would act differently in a situation like this, but do you really know? What makes some people, like the Stanford guards, succumb to chaos, while others maintain sanity? Zimbardo suggests that one of the most dangerous ingredients in this equation is obedience to authority. Whether it's a person, an institution, or a set of rules, authority can lead even the most ethical individuals to commit atrocities. Let's go back to the Milgram experiment for a moment. The participants weren't evil people, they were simply following orders, convinced they were contributing to a greater good. This tendency towards obedience didn't start with Milgram, and it certainly didn't end there. Just recall the tragic Jonestown massacre. Jim Jones, a charismatic leader who initially preached utopian ideals, gradually became a tyrant, and his followers didn't notice the transformation. They trusted him and obeyed him, up until the moment they were offered cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. More than 900 people died that day, not because they were evil, but because they were obedient. So here's a question for you to ponder. How many times have you followed an order, not because you believed it was the right choice, but simply because it was the easier path? How often do you challenge the authorities around you, or do you just assume they know what's best? Maybe it's time to start asking yourself these uncomfortable questions before you find yourself neck-deep in a moral quagmire. But the problem with authority doesn't end there, does it? The journey toward wrongdoing has another stealthy accomplice, the loss of personal responsibility. Imagine yourself in the Milgram experiment, your hand hovering over the button, increasing the voltage as the learner in the adjacent room screams in pain. But you don't have to worry, right? After all, the man in the white coat said he'd take full responsibility. So if something goes wrong, it's not your fault, right? This phenomenon, known as de-individuation, is incredibly dangerous ground. It's the same mechanism that leads people in crowds to wear masks, soldiers to wear uniforms, and online aggressors to hide behind anonymous profiles. When you believe your actions can't be traced back to you, it becomes terrifyingly easy to abandon the brakes of morality. Zimbardo conducted a practical experiment to demonstrate this in a shocking way. He left an abandoned car in the Bronx, a place where anonymity reigns. Within hours, the car was completely destroyed and looted. In contrast, an identical car was left in Palo Alto, a more close-knit community where people recognize each other. There, the car remained untouched, as if it were invisible. This serves as a powerful reminder that when anonymity comes into play and responsibility shifts, evil finds fertile ground to flourish. How many of you, hidden behind your screens, have said or done something you'd never do in real life? It's easy to hide. Easy to become someone else when no one is watching. But is that shadowed person someone you'd want to face in the mirror? Moreover, there's the final blow to empathy: dehumanization. How do you get a person to commit atrocities against another? The answer is simple: by convincing them that the other isn't truly human. This psychological trick justified some of the worst horrors in history. Zimbardo cites an alarming study conducted by Albert Bandura at Stanford. In it, students were tasked with overseeing and punishing another group based on their decisions. The difference? The punishers overheard conversations in which the opposing group was described in dehumanizing terms, being called animals and savages. Unsurprisingly, the punishments imposed on that group were significantly harsher than those applied to another group described as attentive and understanding. This is the same twisted logic that underpinned the Nanking massacre, where Japanese soldiers, by dehumanizing Chinese civilians, unleashed unprecedented brutality. Perhaps you'd like to believe that this kind of dehumanization, is it a thing of the past, or does it only reside in the minds of evil people? However, it is enough to look around you in today's world. How often do you hear someone being called an animal, scum, or worm? Once those labels are applied, it becomes surprisingly easy to ignore someone else's suffering and justify cruel acts. Here's the terrifying truth: the moment you stop seeing someone as fully human is the exact instant you open the door to your own dark side. And it gets even worse. As they say, words can be as dangerous as weapons, and when used skillfully, they can disguise even the most atrocious actions. Enter euphemistic language, a subtle and polished vocabulary that transforms torture into enhanced interrogation and genocide into ethnic cleansing. It's like sweeping blood under the rug. Zimbardo explores how this softened language and powerful ideologies create narratives that mask evil acts, allowing the perpetrators to sleep peacefully at night. In the Milgram experiment, for example, participants were led to believe they were contributing to science and helping improve memory, when, in reality, they were inflicting pain on another human being. Moving to more recent times, the same pattern repeats. The US invasion of Iraq and the torture at Abu Ghraib were not presented as atrocities, but as necessary actions in the fight against terrorism, justified as indispensable evils to protect national security. Soldiers immersed in this ideological narrative believed they were doing good, even while committing acts that would be widely condemned on a global level. It's a grim reminder: when narratives are manipulated and language is softened, the evil that emerges can be rationalized, justified, and even celebrated. The next time you hear someone distorting words to make something cruel seem virtuous, ask yourself what's really happening behind that polished rhetoric. We must not sink into despair yet. Zimbardo's journey through the dark corners of the human mind teaches us that even in the face of chaos, you still have the power to choose. Just because you feel on the edge of an abyss doesn't mean you are destined to fall. Just as the potential for evil exists within each of us, the capacity for heroism is also present. What does it take to resist the temptation of the shadows and stand firm against external forces that try to pull you toward the dark side? The key lies in personal responsibility. It's about taking charge of your own decisions, even when the environment favors anonymity or the comfort of following authority. The Milgram experiment showed us that some participants, despite overwhelming pressure, refused to continue. They chose to stop, not because they were superior, but because they decided to take responsibility for their own actions, even when no one else did. This reminds us that the power to resist evil is not innate, but a continuous choice made in each situation, at every moment. However, there is an important challenge. One must always be vigilant. It takes courage to stand up, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when everyone around you remains seated. And it is this vigilance that separates a potential hero from a possible monster. But how do you resist the pressure of authority when it leads you down dark paths? The answer may seem simple, but the practice is challenging. You must question authority. That's right, question everything. Just because someone wears a uniform, holds a title, or speaks confidently does not make them infallible. Zimbardo's studies repeatedly show that figures of authority, when unquestioned, can turn ordinary people into agents of evil. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that those in power always know what is best or act with good intentions. However, history is full of tragedies caused by blind obedience, from the unfortunate submission in the Milgram experiment to the massacre at Jonestown. The lesson is clear. When it is not controlled, it can become a dangerous guide. You are not at the mercy of authority. Within you, there is a voice, a force that can say no, that can step back and resist. Sometimes, that simple act of resistance is what prevents a fall into the moral abyss. The next time someone orders you to do something that goes against your conscience, stop, reflect, and question. That moment of reflection can be the turning point between being just a follower or becoming a hero. Let's talk, then, about heroes. Because in the middle of this conversation about evil, there is another equally important side. Those who, in times of crisis, choose to act with courage, even when everyone else is paralyzed by fear or conformity. Zimbardo does not leave us sunk in despair. He also shows us a way out, a path that leads to goodness, and this begins with action. What sets a hero apart from others is not superhuman strength or unwavering confidence, but the willingness to act when everyone else is motionless. Take the example of Wesley, the New York subway hero. When a man in the middle of a seizure fell onto the tracks, Wesley did not wait for others to take the initiative. He jumped onto the tracks, pressed the man against the trench between them, and protected him as the train passed over their heads. While others watched in shock, paralyzed by fear, Wesley risked his life to save a stranger. That is true heroism, not great feats in epic battles, but small yet decisive actions in crucial moments of daily life. It's about putting others' well-being above your own, about doing what is right even when it seems terrifying. Zimbardo's message is clear. Heroism is within the reach of any ordinary person. It is a choice. And it's a choice you can make every day. This brings us to an uncomfortable truth that Zimbardo makes us see. Each of us, without exception, carries within us the potential for both good and evil. We are contradictory beings, capable of heroic acts, but also of deep cruelties. The decision between these two extremes does not happen only once. It is a continuous battle, a daily struggle. Today, you may be the hero. Tomorrow, under the right circumstances, you could become the villain. The key is to be aware of this duality. Zimbardo invites us to recognize this inner struggle, to understand that evil is not just out there somewhere, embodied by monstrous figures. It exists within each of us. However, this should not lead to despair, but rather to vigilance. When you accept this duality and understand that you have the power for both good and evil within you, you are better prepared to guide your actions and make decisions that reflect your best self. This awareness not only makes you a more integral person, but also more mindful, capable of acting with purpose, instead of being led by external circumstances. In the end, it is not about fearing who you could become, but about choosing every day who you wish to be. As we approach the end of this reflection, it is essential to understand that the line between good and evil is not merely an abstract philosophical concept. It permeates our daily lives. Zimbardo's work reminds us in a powerful way that this line is not fixed. It can shift and become blurred depending on our choices and the circumstances we find ourselves in. And here lies the most important point. By realizing this, you gain a power that many ignore. You are not just another figure in the crowd, passively following orders or yielding to pressures around you. With this awareness comes responsibility. Knowing the factors that can lead to evil places you in a position of power, the power to resist, to take action, to become the protagonist of your own story. And this is not just a philosophical ideal. It is a demand in a world where the lines of morality are constantly challenged, where social forces and figures of authority may try to push you toward the abyss. Being aware of these forces is what gives you the tools to resist. The question is, are you ready to choose the light when darkness seems easier? Are you prepared to act when everyone around you hesitates? In the end, it's not just about avoiding evil, but about actively choosing good. Let's sum it all up. Zimbardo's The Lucifer Effect is not just a work about the dark aspects of human nature. It is an invitation to act, a call for each of us to face the potential for evil that exists within and consciously choose to do good. The situations you face will test your morality, pushing you toward that frontier where right and wrong become confused. However, it is in those moments of testing that your true character is revealed. Remember the lessons we discussed: blind obedience to authority, the abdication of personal responsibility, dehumanization, and the power of euphemistic words. It is easy to stray down a dark path. But don't forget that within you lies the power to resist, to question, and to act with courage, even when everything seems to conspire against you. You don't need superpowers to be a hero. It is enough to have the courage to act, to choose the path of light repeatedly, every day. And it is that choice, that consistency, that makes all the difference. Now, as we reach the end of this journey through the darkest corners of the human psyche, guided by insights from Zimbardo, I want to make something clear. The choice between good and evil is not a single grand event. It is a sequence of small decisions made every moment. Every time you stand up for what is right, resist the pressure of the majority, question authority, or see the humanity in others, you are resisting those forces that try to turn you into something you are not. It is not an easy task, nor is it always obvious, but it is essential. Because in the end, the story of your life will not be written by the situations you encountered, but by the choices you made in response to them. So, make the right decision. Be the hero, not the monster. And when you reach that moral crossroads, and we all will, take a deep breath, look within yourself, and remember the lessons we've discussed today.